So
All the
please
neshamas
thank
gonna
you,
have an aliyah.
thank you again every Sunday for teaching and preparing the year.
That's
We
my
all
honor and my
really
pleasure.
appreciate. We all appreciate.
I see David Mazel occasionally when I'm on the path. We walk every day, and he always sends regards. He misses the year. He has a Sunday morning cavias with his family, but he certainly wants to send everybody best regards. David Mazel. Okay, so we're in the middle of Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph. Tez Zayin Amud Aleph. We've been discussing the the question of whether a Goslin who sells property to somebody that he has stolen, if he makes good on that, in other words, he later buys it from the original owner, the kasha was whether or not that means that he's trying to make good on what he originally did, and the original purchaser should have a legitimate purchase, or no, he buys it and steps into the shoes of the original owner, and the original owner is allowed to come back and take back his property. So he too can now take back the property that he originally sold when it was in its stolen state. Of course, he has to pay money. He can't just take it back. But the kasha here is, can he take the property back? Because we say the property has maybe more value, we say, than the money itself. So that was the question that we were discussing. Rav makes the pronouncement, and of course, Rav was the Gadol Hador, so he made the pronouncement that when a person um, sells if the person steals title and then he sells it to the buyer, that buyer has all future rights to the property, unequivocal future rights to the property, and therefore, when the Goslin legitimizes the property by buying it from the original owner, he automatically meant to do it for the purchaser that he had sold it to. That's Rav's pronouncement, not universally agreed upon. In fact, the Rov doesn't agree. And then we went through what were the reasons for why he would do it. We came upon the Machlekes Mazutra Ravashi that basically there are slightly differing views, but more or less it's the same concept that according to Marzutra, a person doesn't want to be called a Goslin. So if he has the chance to legitimize it, he wants to legitimize it. Therefore, he's not called a Goslin. The Gemara then asks, what about his heirs? If his heirs take it over, are they considered Gazlanim, et cetera, et cetera? And then Ravashi says, no, it's because he wants to maintain a degree of veracity. So he doesn't want to be, again, not the word Goslin, but he doesn't want to be called a liar. So he wants to keep veracity that when he legitimizes it, he actually legitimizes for the other owner. So that was that whole discussion last week, back and forth. And ultimately, the Gemara was trying to find a difference between Marzutra and Ravashi, because more or less they said the same thing. So the Gemara settled on the fact that by a matana, you can be, if you give it as a matana, and now you want to take it back, then you still don't want to be called, you still don't want your veracity impugned, but you can't be called a Goslin because you never stole, you're not stealing it back, right? You gave it as a matana, you're taking back a matana. That's not being considered a Goslin. So that's how the Gemara settled and answered that question. And with that, we finished that segment of the Gemara. Now the Gemara starts here by asking a question. And it's about halfway through. It starts with Vad Emas Nichale Delekin Bamnusa. Vad Emas Nichale Delekin Bamnusa. Gemara asks here, how long a period of time after a person sells a stolen property do we consider that if he buys it back, he's doing it to maintain his veracity, his nemonis. Okay, so the question is, at what point do we say, no, this fella is not really interested in legitimizing what he did? He doesn't care about his veracity. So if he went ahead and purchased it from the original owner, then it's no longer a gesture of trying to make good. That's the Gemara's kasha. In other words, is it infinite or is it finite? That we say that that's what he wants to do. That's the kasha of the Gemara. Up to what point of time do we say that a person wants to maintain veracity? So we have a machlokes between three Amoraim who give three different time frames for this act. Omer Rav Huna says, Rav Huna, achas hamada bedin. You know how long we give him? Until such time, and Rashi, let's look at Rashi, right there. Achas hamada bedin, achiyitrifu min alokeach v'amideu bedin. He's standing in front of the court of a Misha Omed. Beroshe ad shas hamada bedin, goli adatid lo mehemenhu. And so he's, in other words, if he's already coming to din, if a person, he hasn't bought it back. A person sells stolen property, and then the original owner comes back. Now he comes back and he wants his property back. So that takes a period of time, obviously. And then finally, he can't just come back to take it back. I mean, it's not the West. He has to go to court. He has to say to court, this person stole my property. He sold it. Reuben stole my property, sold it to Shimon. I'm back. I'm Levi. I want it back from Shimon. That takes time. When it finally comes to court and there has been no attempt by Reuben to do anything to legitimize, then at that point in time, we say that's the time that he no longer cares about his veracity. So Rashi says, now what happens here? This is an interesting situation. Time goes by, the Gazlan does nothing. He comes before the court, and all of a sudden he turns to the original owner and he says, "You know what? Sell me the property. Sell it to me. We're on the courthouse steps. Sell me the property." So Rashi says, if after there's already a court proceeding, he goes to the original owner and he says, "Sell it to me." He's not doing it to satisfy the original buyer. So in other words, let's say 6 months goes by, as an example, and the courts are slow, and finally we're coming to court, and Levi is going to get his property back from Shimon, right? Took 6 months, which is fast, I guess, by some standards. 6 months. Now, all of a sudden, Reuben says, "You know what? I don't like the looks of this." He quickly turns to Levi and says, "Levi, here's $1,000. I want to buy your property." At that point, it's too late. Rashi says it's too late. He no longer, we don't believe that when he's at din, that he's legitimizing the property on behalf of the original, of his purchasing. We don't believe him. So that's Pshat and Rav Huna. We give him enough time, which is a lot of time. It's not a fixed amount of time, but it's a lot of time for him to try to make good. Okay. Chia bar Rav Omar. Chia bar Rav gives a different interpretation. Adamota adrachta liyode. Until a drachta is actually a document that you get after you go to court, which allows you to go ahead and seize the property. So in other words, we've already gone. Okay, step one, Rav Huna says until you go to court. We're at court. Court makes a judgment. Court says, okay, Levi, you're entitled to your property back. You can get it back from Shimon. And they hand him a document. That document is called a drachta. So Rashi says, Adamota adrachta liyode, achichai v'bezdin lefroa lalokeach ma'osav, until the Bezdin issues this document making the lokeach chayiv to pay, v'omad b'mardo ache kasvu psak din, v'nosta lokeach al chasav, until they write the psak din that he can collect. Shebekol makom sheyimtza yachzik behen. In other words, this document says, you know what? You can go back to this is to the buyer now, to Shimon. You can go back and you can seize any property belonging to Reuven wherever you find it. And that's 90 days after they went to din. So the Gemara in Bava Basra there says that once you go to court, now that's the unknown. A court could be fast or it could be slow. So according to Rav Huna, it's when you go to court, and that's whatever it is. According to Bechir Barav, from that point on, when you get your judgment, 90 days later, you will get this adrachta, and this adrachta basically allows you, Shimon, the buyer of the stolen property, to find another property that Ruvain the Gazlan owns, and then you can go ahead and seize it. In other words, wherever it is, you produce this document from court, and the court says you're allowed to seize this property. So that's according to Chiyah, that's how long it takes. In other words, he's no longer looking to satisfy Shimon, the buyer, by making good on his veracity, by saying, I'll do something good for you. Then Shimon now is allowed to go and collect from wherever he can. All right, that's the second mandala. Rav Papa Omar? No. Rav Papa said, Ad the mischalen yoyme achzarta. So Rav Papa even goes one step further and gives him even more time. Ad the mischalen yoyme de achzarta, says Rashi, la'acher shemotza ze karka mishal gazlan. No, he's already found the property. Remember, 90 days. He says 90 days later, any property that you find of the Gazlan, you can keep. Says Rav Papa, we'll go even one step further. He already has the property. He found the property. So now there's a third step in this process. You found the property, you still can't grab it. You go to court, and you go to another court where the property is located, let's say different jurisdiction, and you show them the achzarta from the original court. You show them that paper. Look, I have this document which says that wherever I find property of the Gazlan, I'm allowed to grab it. So this court then takes that document, right? They take that adrachta, and they hold a public auction. So now there's a public auction on the property that has been seized. And they call out, whoever wants to buy this property, come and bid on the property. That's another 30 days. In other words, the auction is held open for 30 days. And what's the auction for? The auction is to sell the property that the adrachta has designated as payment for this act of gezela. So now what do we have? So we have a court hearing, which whatever long it takes, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, then 90 days, then another 30 days. So at the end of that last 30 days, Shimon finally gets his money back. So that's the Gemara. The Gemara again wants to give us sort of an outline of what the process is to get back the equivalent of the stolen land, right? Because Levi comes back and says, I want to take it back. So the Gemara is telling us that all this time, according to these Manda Amram, the Gazlan still has the opportunity to make good. That's the underlying point here, is that the Gazlan can make good on his theft and buy it legitimately to give to the Lokeach until this last act is done. According to Rav Huna, until Bezdin gives its decision. According to Bechir Barav, you have another 90 days. And according to Rav Papa, yet you have another 30 days, which means that in the 30 days of the auction, for the final gavel to come down on the auction, he goes ahead and buys the property to legitimize. You still can legitimize the property and maintain your veracity. That's what this Gemara is trying to tell us. We constantly give him time, according to the different Manda Amrim, to make good so that he shouldn't be called a Gazlan.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Why is there a public auction if the cheated buyer has a claim certified by a court already?
Because so the good question. So it's inherent in that is the fact that rather than taking this piece of property for which we don't know its value, It may be a very valuable piece of property, David. And what happens if he can get twice the price on auction and then repay the lokeach from that money and still maintain money, the gazlan meaning? And so this is the gazlan's property. Let's say he owes him $1,000, and this is a choice piece of property. It's worth $1,500 or $1,700. So if someone is willing to bid higher than the value of what he owes him, then that's okay. I mean, Yale, don't we have that in our system too? That in other words, we have a circumstance where equity takes over, where if you're forced to sell something to make good and you sell it and there's more money in the sale than what is required to be paid, then you can keep that balance. We don't say that this is something that you're being penalized, that you have to give away that piece of property for whatever it's worth to satisfy the loan. No, we say that you owe him $1,000. You have something worth more than $1,000. You can sell it for $1,500. Sell it for $1,500 and pay him the $1,000, and you keep the rest. So that's the shot here. Is we go through all of this. In a sense, we're protecting the gazlan, in a sense, but we're giving the gazlan the opportunity to make good and be called an honest man. That's what the Gemara's aim is. The aim is to help the gazlan sort of do tshuva and do the right thing. So
is this an open auction? Everybody knows everybody's bid, and everybody knows what the value was because they know how much he stole, right?
Yeah, but yes, but let's say someone is a maven and he understands this is a good piece of property. I'll pay more than $1,000 because anybody will get it for $1,000. But if I offer $1,500, I'll get it, and I want this property because it's good property. For the person who's buying it at auction, it's a question of value. What's it worth to me? If it's worth more than $1,000 to me, and I'd rather have the property, I'll bid more than $1,000. I don't care if the gazlan is going to make a few $100s. It doesn't matter to me. I want the property.
Suppose the bids go below the value of the property.
If the bids go below, then he's still mechuyev the balance.
Right.
Then he's still mechuyev
Which
the
happens.
balance. But we're presuming here that if Shimon went hunting for a piece of property, he may have asked around. Again, we don't know, but he may have asked around. This is the piece of property that I want. And he asked the local clerk, or he went to the assessor, and they say, this is a fine piece of property. This property.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I understand that we're trying to figure out, how many degrees can we allow the gazlan to do tshuva, right? How long can we give him?
Right.
But if the point of him wanting to purchase the property to legitimize the sale is to secure his veracity, for any of these three, he's not going to be called an honest person. In other words, it's just a question. He got caught, and now he wants to try and clear his name. In other words, I get it if he tries to he tries to legitimize the sale before he gets caught. Okay, but once he's caught, whether he's caught and he does it immediately, or he's caught and it goes to auction. In other words, he's been caught. So how is he clearing his good name?
You're right, but at the very end of the day, when the story is told and the story goes exactly the way we described it, the way you said it, you know what? But at the end, Reuven did the right thing. At the end, Reuven did the right thing. He went ahead, he legitimized the property, and then he gave it back to Shimon because, you know what? He had this pang of, I shouldn't have done it. I should have really done it the right way. You're right. Best thing is if he does it even surreptitiously before it hits the fan, before everybody knows. That's the optimum. What this Gemara is telling us, that if he didn't do that and he wasn't smart enough to do it on time, how much time do we give him to come back and say, yes, you did the right thing? You're right. It's not the best situation. It's a b'shas hatchak. It's a last resort. How much can he still clean up his name and say, you know what, this fella he's an okay guy. He did the right thing.
So and then you would go into business with him, Rabbi? Once he clears up his good name?
That's a different question. That's a different question when I go into business with him. But for purpose of Hamnusa, of his veracity,
okay.
At the end of the day, you won't call him a ganef or a gazlan because he legitimized it. You're right. All these things, and it's all in the eye of the beholder, how good a guy he really is. But maybe B'shar Shemayim, he legitimizes his name and he's not a gazlan. Anyway, it's
That's why
interesting. Yeah.
That's why more advanced civilizations have pardons.
Right, right. Anyway, so these are the three different Manda Amrim and how they interpret it. Okay, now, Zok the Gemara weiter. Maskefle Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asked the Kasha. He says, I don't understand. Mechti Hailokeach, b'mai konele. How, let's just go back to the beginning. How did this transaction where a guy stole a piece of property and he sold it, how did this happen? Let's break it down. What happened? Hailokeach b'mai konele ara. How did he buy this land? B'hai shtara, right? A shtar was executed and Ruvain had stolen the property, and it says Ruvain is selling this property. It doesn't say Ruvain stole it, of course. He says Ruvain, I'm selling this property to Shimon for $1,000, etc., and signed. Frek the Gemara, Hashtara chasma bialma. This shtar is nothing but a fragment of earth. I mean, in other words, it's basically not worth the paper it's written on, is what he's asking. It's a fraudulent document. How can there be exercised a transaction on a fraudulent document? It's fraud. It's fraud. So what's the havam in it? He's even asking that we're going through this whole thing that he sold them and now he has to make good and everything. There was never a sale in the first place. This goes back to the very beginning. Remember when Rashi said that when he sold him the property, how could he sell him? It was Gizela. So the Gemara said that he gave him a halvah, that he paid him with a halvah. Then we had all this question about ribbis. Gemara went on and on about ribbis. But the Gemara already hinted to that back, I think it was Yudaladam Beis, by saying that, wait a minute, he didn't really sell him anything. So what's the transaction? So that we said the transaction was that the buyer was lending him money. But now let's get back to the transaction, says the Gemara. The actual transaction never happened. It was a chasba bialma. So in other words, how do we understand this this whole Gemara is what the Gemara is asking. So now the Gemara is going to give us a very interesting answer. Amalei Rava, says Rava, you know how the transaction happened?
Rabbi, how do we ever justify it way back in the early when we started this Gemara? I mean, what was our answer then that said the thing could go through?
Jay, we never asked the question. We immediately launched into the repercussions of what happened without going back and asking what now is being asked as the underlying question. You're absolutely right. We never asked the question. Whatever happened here? You're telling me it was a loan and ribbis and masses. You're building a skyscraper on a swamp. What are you talking about? There was never a transaction. This whole Gemara was based on a fallacy of understanding, is the kasha.
Somehow I saw somebody in the class ask the question. You probably would have said, wait.
Wait, here's the wait, right. So he's asking what's the underlying principle by which this whole matter, right. So now Rava gives a very intriguing answer. Amalei Rava says, now remember, we're still holding, this kasha, by the way, is aimed at Rav. This kasha is aimed at Rav. Why? Because Rav is the one who pronounces that when a person steals and sells the property, that he's selling him all future rights. So the kasha really is on Rav. Rav, you're saying that when a person steals a property, he's selling him all future rights. There was never a deal to begin with. There was never a transaction because it was based on a shtar that had no value. It had no kiyum, had no value. That's the kasha. I mean, it's the underlying question of the whole sugya, but it's the kasha on Rav. Amalei Rava. So Rava gives an answer, and he says, Tehei b'ma'amino. Let us understand. So basically he's saying, let's look at Rashi. Maskele Rami bar Chama aha ma mocha rishon l'sheni. What the first one sold. Tehei hai derav. Again, he points out a Rav. Tehei hai derav b'ma'amino. it should be with the belief that the buyer has in the seller legitimizing the transaction. You hear the answer? The answer is, it's not the shtar, it's not the written paper which makes the deal. And you're right, the written paper isn't worth the paper it's written on because it's based on Gezela. So there is no shtar, there's no real shtar. Rabbi is saying it's not the shtar that makes the transaction. It's ba'amino. It's the belief that the buyer has that the seller will do good by him. You hear such an answer? Rabbi is telling us, this is an amazing answer. Rabbi is telling us that when you have a transaction based on an illegitimate foundation, a gezela, and you write a document which has no value because the document itself is a fallacy, you still can have a transaction. Why? Because the buyer has a belief that the seller will do the right thing. I mean, if you told that to someone today, he'd laugh you right out of the conversation. What do you mean? Okay, Yale, you asked me, would I do business with this guy? This guy was a thief. He forged documents, took a piece of property, sold it to someone else, took his money, and there's no deal. And the buyer is going to say, yeah, but I believe the seller will do good by me. I mean, it almost doesn't make sense. But now let's understand what the Gemara is telling us. So that's the answer. The answer is Omar Rava. Omar Rava Tehei B'Amamino. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, Bahu Hano. With the Hano, meaning the benefit. The lo Ka'omale Midi. That the Gazlan, this is the Hano for the Gazlan. That the lo Ka'omale Midi, that the buyer didn't say a cross word to him. Because Somach Alea, and he relied on his goodwill. Torach Umaisale, he works hard to be able to buy it, to complete it with the seller. Gomer Umaknale, and that he will buy it from the original owner. Do you hear such a thing? The buyer of the stolen property, because he didn't say a word to the Gazlan, you Gazlan, what did you do? You sold me a piece of stolen property. So the Gazlan takes strength from that the buyer did not say a cross word to him. So he says, you know what? This guy, I'm going to do right by this guy. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to go to the original owner. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to legitimize the sale. Says Rava, that's the basis for the sale. That's what makes the sale a good sale, is because the buyer believed in him, and the seller said, you believe in me, I'm going to do good by you. I mean, in business, that's unheard of. We never heard of such a thing. Says the Gemara, remember, this is now an ethical discussion. Okay, we're beyond the original realm of legalities, because legally it's chaspa ba'alma. It's a shard. It's a piece of earth. This piece of paper is not worth the value of what's printed on.
So the Gemara is saying we have a chashuva gazlan here. Chashuva gazlan, who is in his conscience will bother him, and he's going to make do.
Exactly right. That's Rava's territory.
Talking about an innate cheskas kashrus among Yidden, right?
Everybody, right. But here the Gemara is telling us one step further, that the Gazlan is motivated by the fact that the buyer didn't say a cross word to him. What are you selling me? Is this a joke? You took my money and you sold me a piece of stolen land? He didn't say a word to him. So he's energized by the fact that the buyer believed in him, that he wouldn't sell him down the river, that he wouldn't sell him, an old bridge. So because of that belief, we say that the seller will be motivated to do good. I mean, this is a pretzel. You have to say, he sold him the land. The land was bad. The buyer didn't say a word. He just took it. He realizes, oh my gosh, Reuven just sold me a piece of stolen land. And Reuven says, Shimon, you didn't say a word to me to embarrass me or to say something to me. I'm going to go out of my way to find Levi, buy it from him, and give you the land. And that's pshat in Rav. That's pshat in Rav. That's what Rav means. When Rav says that when you sell him the stolen land, you're selling him all future zechusim. What's pshat future zechusim? Rav says that this Gazlan is going to do tshuva. And this Gazlan is going to go ahead and legitimize the sale. And when he legitimizes the sale, he only did it for the buyer because the buyer believed in him. The buyer trusted him that he would not leave him hanging. That's how far we go, says Rava. So Rava is really legitimizing Rav's belief in the Gazlan, because Rav is the one who says, remember, everybody argues on Rav. Everybody says, we don't agree with you that when you sell him this stolen piece of land, you're selling him all futures of chusim. No way, say the other, says everybody else. Only Rav says it. So we're legitimizing Rav by saying that what Rav meant was that there would be his veracity, obviously, that there would be a belief in him that he would be motivated to do the right thing. That's Pshat and Rav.
But Rabbi, he only did the right thing because he got caught. He set this all up.
Lav dafka. No. Lav dafka, he got caught. This could now be going back to the beginning. Remember, in last week and before, we're saying that he had a hero tshuva, came Rosh Hashanah, he said, oh, what did I do? I sold him a bad piece of land. I want to go ahead and I want to legitimize it. Michael, we started out by talking about how long does he have to legitimize it? And this is after it already became public. But let's take a step back. Even before it became public, he wants to legitimize it. Even before it became public. In other words, the Gazlan found, the buyer found out, oh my God, this is a stolen piece of land. And the Gazlan says, don't worry. This is your land. It's all fine and good. So the Gemara is saying, yes, he has 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever it is. But if none of that ever happened and he had a hero tshuva himself, and he said, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have sold this. I shouldn't have done this. I quickly want to go ahead and buy it. Even then, before it's known, you're right. If it's known, okay, fine. But even before it's known, he wants to legitimize it. The Gemara is saying he can go ahead and legitimize it. And once the buyer finds out that it was stolen land, he still didn't say a word to the Nigzal. Even before it became public, he just found out. Someone told him, you know what? That fellow, that's not his land. He said, it isn't his land? He says, I know he would never sell me a piece of stolen land. I'm going to believe that this is going to be legitimate. So in other words, that conversation happened even before it became public knowledge. Once the buyer found out that it was stolen, he still did not go to the Gazlan and said, what did you do here? In other words, he still had trust in him. They had a conversation. They sat around a cup of coffee and he said, you know what? This isn't so right. He says, don't you worry. I'm going to make it all right and good.
But what if it happened and he didn't know about it? And then he did it because he found out about it. I mean, what if he was trying to make a buck illegally, and then he finds out about it, so he realizes it's going to affect him, so then he makes the change? Why isn't that the motivation?
The answer is even if that's the motivation. In other words, even if it's the motivation that he got caught and now he wants to maintain his veracity, he doesn't want the world to say this fella is a liar and a cheater, so he wants to make good. The Gemara, Rava is telling us, you know how far we're going to go with this? We're going to say that Rav believes all along that this is a legitimate transaction once it's transacted. And even though the original transaction had no value because the shtar was a fake shtar, it was not even a legitimate contract, it's because the buyer motivates the seller through his trust in him that he'll do the right thing. So it's the buyer that's motivating the seller to do the right thing. And the seller says, because of you, I am going to do the right thing. It doesn't matter. In other words, Michael, you're sort of looking at it from the Goslin's point of view. Why is he's not such a tzaddik? No, he's not a tzaddik. He stole a piece of land, but the transaction is considered legitimate because of the mindset of the parties. In other words, the mindset of the buyer gives the Goslin the right to do this.
I understand that it could be either way in terms of motivation, but why doesn't he have to pay a penalty for doing something that was wrong? So he should have to restore plus the amount because he did it under false pretense.
Right. Okay. So that's a good question. And so let's now we have to go back to what the Torah tells us, that if the Goslin is found out, right? So now we have to understand the nuance of kefel. You're asking about kefel, basically, is the punishment, the penalty where he has to pay double, right? The punishment of kefel. The Torah tells us that if someone steals and he's caught, and he has to return the good, and he has to pay kefel. So the question is, does this apply here where he has to pay kefel? And the answer may depend on exactly how this came down. So I would agree with you that if he was totally found out with and never himself tried to make good, that there would be an Indian of kefel. I think we're not so much concerned with kefel in this case as we are with the mindset of a seller who is trying to do good by a buyer who was taken in. So I think the two parallels. You're right. He should be penalized. And under circumstances, if it's the right circumstance that the Torah describes, he will be penalized and he'll have to pay kefel. The question here, and the kefel, by the way, will have to go to the original owner. But we're suspending that whole discussion of kefel. For our purpose, it's a business transaction, and a businessman, either at the time that shortly after he made the transaction, or when first word started leaking out that he stole this land, he right away wanted to make good. He wasn't captured, so to speak, and caught without having tried to legitimize his transaction. So there's a subtlety here, which I agree with you. Depending on what the timeline is, there may be a kefel component or not. You're right, Michael. There may be a kefel component or not.
Rabbi, is there any difference between land and metaltalin here when it comes to Geneva and kefel?
Well,
because land can't be moved. You can't.
Land can't be moved, but you still could be penalized for land. And I have to look at the Rashi in that pasuk if it spoke specifically about metaltalin. But the question is, you're right. Land can't be stolen. You can't take it away somewhere. But there still can be a penalty for someone who does it. So. In other words, you don't get scot-free necessarily. You don't get off scot-free.
So if this piece of land had some metaltalin on it, it had a car or something, a tractor, what happens with that, the metaltalin, in terms of what Michael's asking? Should that go into kefel automatically? Or
Well, yeah,
part of the land?
Yeah, no. So you're right. If we're going to start talking about personal items on the property, that would be a separate matter, because those items. Did he sell it with the tractor or without the tractor? You're right. I mean, that's a whole different discussion about.
He doesn't know what's on the land. You know, he just had a good deal. It sounded like a good piece of land, and the Ganef was ready to sell it. And there's assumptions there that you have to consider, I guess. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we'll have to take a look at that. That's a good question. Is does he have to pay kefel on the personality, on the personal property, and not on the land? But again, Michael, you're right in asking it. The point here is that if kefel applies, kefel will apply. But our discussion is focused on the seller at some point, whether he was caught or whether the word started getting out or before the word started getting out, he wanted to legitimize it. And Rav says that when he sold it, he sold him all the rights. So Okay, so that's,
What in a sense, though, what we come back to is that in a certain way is that we say actions speak louder than words. But in a case like this, the action happened, and the action might yet still in the end still have been done, and retroactively working around it. But the whole idea is that the words matter more, in that he's trying to clear his name, he's trying to say it's going to be okay, and so on. And I think almost it's a little bit, quite a bit different. The extreme that we have all these cases where we do everything we can to make somebody actually do a shvuah, because the name of Hashem, but still it's ideas that we do everything we can to make the words sort of the top when it comes to these things, even if the actions are all messed up.
right. But again, this whole concept of we call it tshuva, but I mean, this concept of there was a lapse and now he wants to fill the lapse with doing the right thing. So the Torah, by its very nature, is forgiving. In other words, it's not we don't want to punish at the drop of the hat. We want someone to be able to say, I made a mistake and I want to correct my mistake. Once you correct the mistake, okay, fine, then we could move on. So as to whether or not the words or the actions, it's making it right at the end of the day, right? Without being dogmatic and saying actions speak louder than words, or words could change it. In other words, this transaction happened, and now how do we make it right? So if a guy wants to go out of his way to make it right, the Torah is not going to say, no, you missed the boat. You can't do it. I mean, here the Gemara has a discussion previous as how far down the line do we allow him to still come back and correct his actions. So we had three Mandomrim who gave us three interpretations of what it means to maintain your veracity by still being able to legitimize what you did improperly in the first place. Okay, fine. We have a discussion on that. But at the end of the day, the question is, if on Rob, if Rob says that selling a piece of property that was stolen, you sell him all the rights, so whatever happens later belongs to that buyer, how far do we take that? Says the Gemara, you know what? That it isn't a matter of the regular transaction, which is through a document. You write a document with all the details, and that's what makes a deal. Yes, that's the norm. But in this particular case, it's not the norm because that document never happened. So Rava is really going out on a limb here by saying, you know what? The transaction happened not in the normal way through a shtar. It happened through a belief of the parties. The fact that the party believed that he would be legitimized is enough to make the transaction a valid transaction. That's a gewaldige chiddush that Rav is telling us. That's not something that we would conjure up on our own. You know what? The buyer had belief in the seller that the seller wasn't going to sell him down the river, and therefore the seller says, I'm going to do everything in my power to make this right because he believed in me. I mean, that's almost like out in left field. Whoever thought of that? Says Rava, that's a legitimate form of putting an imprimatur on the transaction because of his belief. Yeah, Jay.
Excuse me, Rabbi, but Lewis had a question that came through the chat line. Lewis, do you want to say something? You want to ask that question? You have to unmute.
Isn't it reasonable to assume that in such a case, such a robbery, that it was inadvertent? Reuven buys a field from Shimon, and he thinks that a field includes parcel A, B, C, and D. But Shimon really only sold him A, B, and C, but Reuven wasn't aware of it. He goes and he looks at the land, which is 20 miles away from where he lives, and he says, you know, this little piece over here, I really don't need. I could sell it to Levi. And he goes and sells it to Levi, but he didn't own it because Shimon didn't sell it to him, but he didn't realize it.
So you're talking about where it was inadvertent?
Yes.
No. Inadvertent is really a different circumstance. There it's a mekach. You could say that he didn't even realize that it was a piece of land that was included in, not included in that parcel swap. But our Gemara is talking about a predetermined effort to steal a piece of property. In other words, they're not the same. You're right. In a case where it was inadvertent, then, we have to sort of separate that out and sort of figure out, he didn't mean it. And so we go back to the parties and we try to sort it out. But again, there he would jump at the opportunity to make good because he never had a have a minute to sell him a piece of stolen land. Right. So you're right. But here we're talking about predetermined. He knew that he was stealing the title. And he said, I'm going to sell this piece of land, make myself a fast $1,000 on something I don't own because I can. So here it's a tougher nut to crack because he did it with a predetermined effort to steal. The question is, he has charata from that, and Rav says without lekaf schus, basically without lekaf schus, that he will at every opportunity justify what he did by doing the right thing. That yes, no question, he stole it. Okay, it was not an inadvertent. It was intentionally stolen, but a person that's not the final chapter of his story. In other words, we're going to give him the rights because at some point in time he'll do tshuva, and that's the shot in the Gemara. How long we give him? That's why these three Amoraim went through what they did, is because they say inherently a person's a good guy. He's not bad. So if he, yes, it may be an outside force that will motivate him because it's going to auction or because he's coming to the steps of the courthouse, whatever the reason, but he's not going to allow it to go further. At some point, he's going to say, stop, I have to make right on this and do it. In the case that you're posing, where it was totally inadvertent, it's a whole different set of circumstance, because there, he'll go back and say, Mekach Tos, I really thought I owned this. I thought it was part of the parcel that I bought. So we have to untangle it because I never meant to sell it to you. Now, the Gazlan means to sell it to him and do it surreptitiously. Here, he never meant to sell it to him because he thought that it was part of a group of properties he bought. So we have to sort that. That's a different story. We have to sort that out differently. All right. So back to the Gemara. So the Gemara now, we're going to build on Rava. So Rava says that because of all this, in other words, he has belief that the Gazlan wants to do it because the guy believes in him. Frek the Gemara, Mosav Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes is going to ask a Gavaldiga Kasha here on Rav. What's the Kasha? We have a brisa that says the following. Mashi Irish, if a person says, Reuven says to Shimon, Mashi Irish me Abba Mochalacha, what I am going to inherit from my father, I will sell to you, all in the future. What I will inherit, I will sell to you. Mashatala Mitsudasi Mochalacha. I'm going fishing, and what I will catch in my net, I will sell to you. So basically, Reuven is telling Shimon, I'm going to sell you something I don't have today, but will definitely have in the future, and I'm going to sell it to you. Okay? So there the Mishnah there says, Lo Omar Klum. It's as if he never said anything. It has no value. However, Mashi Irish min Abba Hayom, if he says that which I will inherit from my father today, Mochalacha, I'm selling to you. Mashatala Mitsudasi Hayom Mochalacha. What I'm going to catch in my net today, I will sell to you. Devorov Kayomin. His words are accepted. Okay, so two circumstances. If what I will inherit, I will sell to you. No. What I will inherit from my father today, I will sell to you. Yes. And the same with catching fish or going out and hunting animals. What I will catch, I will sell to you. No. What I will catch and sell to you today, I will. What I will catch today, I will sell to you. Yes. Okay. So we have to understand what that's about. But listen to what the kasha is. The kasha is, the brisa says, if Masha Irish me Abba, that which I will inherit from my father, lo Omar Klum. He didn't say a word. This is a kasha on Rav. Rav just got through saying that when you sell him a piece of stolen property, all future rights go with that property so that later on, if he legitimizes or something happens, it belongs to the buyer. This brisa is in effect telling us the exact opposite. According to Rav, this should be okay to say what I will inherit from my father belongs to you, I'm selling to you. Because it's going to happen, right? Maybe it's going to happen. Maybe the property will be legitimized. We don't know it. But Rav is saying, on a maybe, I'm going to give you bilus. That's what Rav is saying. On a maybe, I'm going to give you bilus. Why not here? And the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, no. Take a look at Rashi. Mitsudasi shel chayis v'oifis v'shel dagim devar kayamim l'kaman parach ma'ishno reishno ma'ishno sefer. So there, the Gemara asks, what's the difference between today and not today? But basically, let's look at the next line. Omer Rami Bar Chama, Hai Gavra v'Hai Tiyufta. Rabbi Bar Chama puts his endorsement and he says, you know what? This Rav Sheshes is a great man and this is a great kasha. Rav Sheshes is right. How can you, Rob, say that when he's buying the stolen property, he sells him the stolen property, he sells him all future rights? Here we have a brisa that says the exact opposite. That if a person says, I'm selling you what I'm going to get by Yerusha, he said nothing. According to Rav, of course it's legitimate. This is the kasha on Rav now. How can Rav say? Remember, Rav is in the minority. All the other major chachamim hold against him. So Rav is coming to say that he has this intrinsic right in the future. What intrinsic right? The brisa says beferish that if I'm selling you what I'm going to inherit, lo maklum. According to Rav, it should be, of course, it's good. So this exchange is beautiful. It's very interesting. Omar Rava, Gavra Chazina, he is a great man, Rav Sheshes, but Tiyufta loy Chazina. But the kasha isn't a good kasha. So it's a very polite way of saying, yes, he's a great man, but his kasha is not a kasha. Why? Hacha samchadata, v'hacha loy samchadata. In the one case by Rav, he was soymech das. What does that mean? Remember, we just got through saying that Rava says that the reason why it's legitimate is because the buyer was someach das. He had complete faith in the seller that the seller would make good, right? That was Rava's answer. The reason why it's a good transaction, even though the shtar isn't worth the paper it's written on, is because of what's in the mind. He was soymech das. He believed in him. So the seller said, you believe in me? I'm going to make it good. I mean, that's really kind of out there. But that's Rav's pshat. So Rav is saying, so we have smichas das. In the case of the brisa by inheritance, there's no smichas das. Why? Take a look at Rashi. The first wide line at the bottom. Loy samchadata de lokeach. The buyer will not be sameach das. The ka'ama miyomer sheyirish me'abav klum shemayimka abav nechasav b'chayav. I'm going to inherit from my father, and I'm selling you that which I will inherit. And you're a smart guy and say, you're selling me what you're going to inherit from your father? What happens if your father sells it all and spends it in his lifetime? You have no Yerusha. I'm supposed to give you something because you're going to give me the inheritance you're going to get from your father. What, was I born yesterday? How do I know that your father's going to give you a penny? Your father's going to take the Yerusha, spend it, and leave you penniless. And you want me to give you something today? No way. So says Rava, loisom chadata. In the case of Yerusha, he's saying there's no smichas das on the part of the recipient that he's going to get the Yerusha. But in the case of the transaction of a stolen property, he's soymech das that the Gazlan is going to do the right thing by him. That's his distinction. This is how Rav is making a distinction. He said, oh, Rav Sheshes, that's a wonderful kasha. You're right. It's a great kasha. But you're a great man, but your kasha has no value because there's a world of a difference between stealing the property and selling it and receiving someone's Yerusha. One case there's smichas das, and one case there's not smichas das. That's his distinction. That's right? I mean, it's an amazing thing. Okay, so that's Rava's answer on the kasha from Rav Sheshes from that brisa. He said you can't compare it because in that brisa there was no smichas das. Says the Gemara explaining. The ozol taruch u'maisele gehechad l'nikra gazlana. Here, the motivating factor is what? What we said earlier, that he doesn't want to be called a gazlan, or he wants to have a veracity. That's a powerful force, says Rava. Not being called a gazlan is enough to make him do tshuva. That's basically what Rava is saying. Therefore, the buyer has smichas das. He relies on that. He says, you know what? I believe in you, that you're going to do good by me. Here, he has no smichas das. Why? As Rashi said, because how does he know there's going to be a Yerusha? How do I know you want me to give you something and you're going to give me everything you catch in the river? You're going to the river. I mean, I'm not a fisherman, but I'm sure there are fishermen who go out and catch nothing. And they come back after a day of fishing and they had a nice lunch and a couple of beers and no fish. Why? Because the fish didn't bite. So smichas das on something like that is much finnier. It's much more finicky. In other words, it doesn't have the same basis, says Rava, as where someone steals a piece of land, sells it, and the buyer believes that the gazlan is going to do the right thing. That's basically Rava's distinction. Okay, so now Shlucha Lekame de Rav Abba Bazavda. They asked this kasha. They took this kasha to Rav Abba Bazavda. Amalahu zu ein tzricha lifnim. This is not a kasha that I have to take into the yeshiva to have a discussion. so Rashi says it means one of two things: either it was too complicated and they wouldn't know the answer, or it was basically a foolish question because everybody knows the answer. So Rashi says, ein tzricha lifnim. Because they wouldn't even know how to answer it. In other words, he's saying it's such a deep question that if I took it for discussion in yeshiva, they wouldn't know. It can only go to a gadol hador, so to speak. Uchuvas ha'ga'onim, says Rashi, the ga'onim say partially gnai. They do it for gnai, meaning for the other way around. The leka kusha ma'alya al tala legi. Don't even take it in the yeshiva. It's such a superficial question. Don't waste the time of the b'nai yeshiva in asking the question. So we don't know what he really means when he says don't take it into the yeshiva. It could be either because it was a good kasha or it was not a good kasha. Either way. Amar Rava, so Rava says zusricha lefnim v'lefly lefnim. So Rava comes back. Again, this is all a very interesting dialogue between the Amoraim. And Rava says, not only take it into the yeshiva, take it deep into the yeshiva because it's such a tremendous issue that it can only go to the very top of the yeshiva. That's what he means. Hacha samchadata, v'hacha samchadata. In one case, in other words, Rava really wants to defend Rav here. And he wants to say that Rav is correct in the face of all of the other Mefarshim or Chachamim of the time, the Rabbanon. And he says Rav is correct that he puts faith in the Gazlan, and that's what distinguishes it from the case of the Brisa, where a person pledged something by Yerusha or something he would catch. So let's just finish. Hay ovda b'Pumpadisa. The same incident happened. The same story happened in Pumpadisa. V'ozvei, and they asked a kasha, the same kasha that Rav Sheshes asked. Amal Rabbi Yosef zu'en etzricha lefnim. He said the same thing. It doesn't have to go into the yeshiva. Again, it could be one or the other. Amalei Abaya, and this is not Rava, this is Abaya who said tzricha lefnim v'lefly lefnim. Abaya was the one who says, no, this is a good kasha. Hacha sam chadata, hacha lo sam chadata. All right, so what do we see from this Gemara? we see from this Gemara, besides the wonderful, beautiful exchange between the Amoraim, how they spoke in such beautiful language, lefnai lefnim, yes, no, that Rav, and again, we're going to see this hopefully next week, because we're going to get to the root of what's Rav's svara. We're trying to understand why Rav says what he says, and we can speculate, but we'll see it next week. Rav says that there's a certain chazaka that a person has, and it's an amazing thing, because on the surface you wouldn't give him that benefit of the doubt, that when he sold this stolen property to the other fellow, you know, I think, Jay, you asked the kasha about metaltalin and about karka. Karka ain't an exolin. I mean, that's the bottom line is you can't steal karka because you can't move it from point A to point B. So stealing karka is not the same as stealing metaltalin, where you can hide it. And by the way, Michael, I'll double check, but I think that may be the difference. Kefel applies to something that you can take and hide and never recover. So in a case where you steal personality, metaltalin, there we say kefel. You have the audacity to steal something which could never be recovered. You have to pay for it. I'm thinking that may be the difference, but I'll look it up. In the case of gezela of karka, you can't steal karka because it's going to be here today and tomorrow and the next day. So what can you do? You forge the title. You say, again, forging title is no small matter, because the guy's going to come and say, what do you mean you forged my title? And he's going to say, no, you sold it to me. Here's a star. So by forging the document, he's really putting the sort of his stample on the gezela, because he has a chutzpah in broad daylight. He's going to take a piece of property away. Everybody knows this property is here, but he's going to try to talk you into believing that he bought it from him when he didn't. So gezela of a karka is different than stealing metaltalin. But so Rav says that chutzpah of stealing a piece of property has with it that the gazlan knows what he did. I mean, there's no way out. You know, he can't hide that piece of, either he's going to sink or swim by the belief that people will believe him that it's his property. So his veracity, his nemonis, his not being called a gazlan is on the line for everybody to see. Says Rav, I believe that he will do the right thing, either because of Mar Zutra or because of Rav Ashi's interpretation. He will do the right thing. So when he sells it to him, I believe at the end of the day, it will all come out good. He has nemonis. Rav has nemonis in him. That nemonis, he says, is what the person who bought the stolen property puts his trust in the gazlan, rightly or wrongly, but he puts his trust in the gazlan. That's Rav's shita. That's how Rav comes out. You can see how all the other gedolim, all the chachamim hold against him, because he's going to say, what are you talking about? He's a gazlan, for goodness sake. I mean, he's a thief. You're going to believe a thief? As Yael said, you're going to go to business with a thief? What are you going to do here? You're not doing the right thing. Rav says, no, I believe in him. The brisa here, is a very open and shut matter. I'm going to give you I'm going to give you a watch. I'm going to sit here, and you're going to tell me, you know what? You give me this watch, I'm going to give you my father's Yerusha. My father's worth millions. And you say, what, was I born yesterday? How do I know you're getting a Yerusha? How do I know that you're going to chop fish? How do I know anything? In other words, you're telling me something that you don't have that you're going to give me for something that I'm giving you. Raisa says no. Why? Lo somcha data. It has to do with your mindset. In your mind, you don't believe him. You don't believe him that he's going to come through for you. That's pshat in the brisa. That's what Rava said. Rava and Abaya, as it turns out, were big defenders of Rav. And they both said that the mindset of a person in the case of the brisa is, I can't believe you. I'm not going to give you this expensive watch or whatever because you're going to give me a Yerusha. On the case of a gazlan, because it is so audacious that a person will ultimately say, wait a minute, I can't go through with this. I've got to do the right thing here. I must do the right thing. So it almost defies understanding, but yet Rav believes in him, and he says that the the buyer of a stolen piece of property believes in the Goslin and believes the Goslin is going to do the right thing by him. It almost seems counterintuitive, I agree. But yet that's how we have to understand Rav. That's Pshat and Rav. That he's counterintuitive that he'll do the right thing. But in a normal case, you take your risk. He's not doing anything improper. He's saying to him, when I get my Yerusha, I'll pay you. He fully expects to get a Yerusha. If he doesn't get his Yerusha at the end, he's going to say, I'm sorry, I didn't get my Yerusha. I didn't mean to steal from you. I made you a trade. Your watch for my Yerusha. Your watch for my catch of the day. But it was in plain sight. It wasn't done surreptitiously. The case of the Goslin is a surreptitious case because, again, even though the Gemara gives us different circumstances, one in which the buyer knew it was stolen, right? We talked last week about one case where the buyer knew it was stolen, but for the most part, the buyer doesn't know it was stolen. He buys it in good faith. Says Rav that the seller sells it to him in good faith, and the buyer accepts that, and therefore the transaction is valid. It's a Gemara seichel that Rav is giving us, because under the normal circumstance, everybody who asks the question, how can it be, is right. In the normal circumstance, we should not be gan lekapsulos. We shouldn't give him the benefit of any doubt. Says Rav, we do give him the benefit that he is going to do good by him at the end. And that's the basis of the machlokes between Rav and the other Rabbanim. Okay, so this is really a novel piece of Gemara when you think about the Svaras. It really is quite novel. It's quite novel. So Mitchum, next week, we're going to pick up from there, and we're going to, next week, I think, get to what Rav is really, what his belief is. There's another big machlokes in the Gemara, of which Rav takes one of the sides, and Mitchum will see that.
All right, Shikov, be safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody have a wonderful week, and hopefully with the vaccination now becoming more prevalent, it looks like maybe more people hopefully will get it.
Oh, yeah, all right.
All right,
Thank
Zach
you.
is on.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. Go ahead.